Good afternoon in the United States. Good morning in the United States, good afternoon in Europe, and good evening in Asia if you're watching from Asia. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a very important conversation for you this morning. It's about kidnapped Ukrainian children in Russia. We have an outstanding program of experts. We're doing this event with the Razom Center, which is a wonderful partner. And because of the importance of this subject, despite very, very heavy demands in Congress, we have video messages from Senator Chuck Grassley and Senator Amy Klobuchar. And with that, I'll turn this over to the videotapes, and then Shelby Magid, my deputy, will be running the conversation with our expert panelists. And thank you all for tuning in.
Russia has abducted about 20,000 Ukrainian children. And that's just the number of children that we know about. Put it in perspective. That's about the population of Muscatine or Burlington, Iowa. The real number is probably much larger. Would you believe it? Russian authorities have claimed that over 700,000 Ukrainian children have been evacuated. They use the word evacuated, not kidnapped. That's more than the 5 largest cities in Iowa combined. Now, that's very hard to get your mind around that. But if you know history, it isn't new. On March 25th, I spoke on the Senate floor to mark the anniversary of Stalin sending 95,000 innocent civilians from the Baltic to Siberia. Stalin's goal, way back there in the 40s and 50s, was to eliminate the national identity of the 3 Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. That's similar to what Putin is doing in Ukraine today. A tiny fraction of the abducted children have been rescued by courageous family members and by volunteers. These rescued kids say that they were placed in camps and were constantly bombarded with Russian propaganda to make them forget who they are. That is a very sick tactic. Well, Russification didn't work in the Baltics 70 years ago. It didn't work when Stalin starved millions of Ukrainians to death. It didn't work when Catherine the Great in the 18 or late 1700s tried to stamp out Ukrainian identity before. Russian brutality just confirms to Ukrainians that they cannot give up, and I don't think they will give up. It's hard to have any trust in a country like Russia, whose leaders do terrible things like bomb children's hospitals and torture and murder civilians. So obviously, any peace agreement that's being talked about right now has to include returning these kidnapped children.
Thank you to the Atlantic Council and to Razom for Ukraine for hosting this important discussion. I also want to thank Nathaniel Raymond, who I know is on the panel today, for the heroic work his team at Yale has done to document Russia's mass kidnapping of Ukraine's children. We all know that there's uncertainty right now about the path forward in so many ways, including for these children, for the future of Ukraine itself, and for America's role in bringing the war to an end. We have to stand with Ukraine. So there may be a lot of uncertainty, but what's not uncertain is how we got here. 3 years ago, Vladimir Putin launched his unprovoked, unlawful, unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, and we have all borne witness to his inhuman barbarism. The bombing of maternity wards, the burned out apartment buildings in Irpin that I witnessed myself, The mass graves in Bucha. I saw those mass graves in Bucha. I saw the sites of those atrocities when I visit Ukraine at the start of the war with former Republican Senator Rob Portman. Those images will stick with me for the rest of my life, as will the images in an earlier trip of the children and grandparents in wheelchairs pouring over the border to Poland with nothing but little purses or backpacks on their back filled with stuffed animals. But just as Vladimir Putin has shown his true colors, the Ukrainian people have shown theirs, defending their democracy in bright blue and yellow. I'm thinking about the ballerina who put on camo and then went to the front lines, the student who escaped the bombing of Kharkiv but came back to rebuild it, and the thousands of Ukrainian children as young as 4 months and as old as 17 who are being forcibly separated from their families, deported to Russia, sent to re-education camps, moved to foster homes, or put up for adoption into Russian families. Right now, we are confronting an organized, large-scale, government-directed human trafficking operation, an operation carried out under the direction of the Russian government, led by officials who have brazenly used Russian military transport planes to deport children, officials who have sent them far and wide to more than 20 regions across Russia from the Black Sea to the Pacific Ocean. We keep learning more about what they endure from the few children who make it back home from Russia or the Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine. I'm thinking of Maxim, age 17, who said last month that she had been abducted, handcuffed, and taken to a military enlistment office to be drafted into the Russian army before he escaped and went into hiding. The more time that goes by, the harder it may be to find the kids. Their names and origins are being obscured. Their faces and voices change as they grow up, making them harder to identify. Some of them are so young, just little toddlers, they won't even remember their homeland. But hope is not lost. We know that more than 1,200 kids have been brought home. Organizations such as Save Ukraine are working every day to find, contact, and recover more of them. Canada has rallied a global coalition of 41 countries to coordinate and advocate for them. I firmly believe that it must be the policy of the U.S. to support efforts to bring all of Ukraine's children back. I have colleagues from both sides of the aisle who agree, and I continue to believe that leaders must stand up and must stand up for Ukraine. I led a bipartisan group of my colleagues, including Senator Grassley, to call on this administration to immediately resume funding for programs that help to find the stolen kids. We must sustain that funding and also ensure that evidence and data that has been collected is maintained and shared with enforcement authorities in Ukraine and in Europe. These kids need people to stand up for them. I will continue to do that and will join forces with anyone in Congress who will stand with me. America must send a clear message that we stand with Ukraine, that we stand against tyranny. President Zelensky memorably declared on that street corner the day of the invasion, the first day when everyone had counted him and Ukraine out, he said the simple words, 3 words, "We are here." Well, we must say that resoundingly and without hesitation for the children of Ukraine and for all the people of Ukraine. We are here for you. Thank you.
Those were very powerful messages, and thank you to both senators for taking the time to join us for this and for your leadership on this issue and in responding to Russian aggression. Thank you also to our partner, Razom for Ukraine, in all their critical engagement on the Hill and helping get those important messages. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We've got some fantastic experts, and I'll introduce them, and then we'll have a short video followed by a moderated discussion. Later, we'll have audience questions, and you can submit your questions at any time at askac.org. Again, that is askac.org. Now for introductions, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christina Hook, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and an assistant professor of conflict management at Kennesaw State University's School of Conflict Management, Peacebuilding, and Development. My partner in crime here, Mykola Mursky, director of advocacy at Razom for Ukraine. Nathaniel Raymond, Executive Director of the Humanitarian Research Lab at the Yale University School of Public Health, And last but not least, Irina Suslova, representative of the Commissioner for the Rights of the Child in the Office of the Ombudsman of Ukraine. Thank you all. So now we're going to play a powerful new ad that Razom recently aired on Fox News. And if you want to see more about their work, you can go to releasethekids.com. Now over to the video.
Since invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin's military has abducted over 19,000 Ukrainian children. A good deal wouldn't leave them behind. President Trump, you have the power to bring them home. Visit releasethekids.com.
Thank you, Razom, for that. Now, Irina, thank you for joining us from Ukraine. I'd like to turn to you first if you have any reaction to the senators or to the video. But my question for you is, you work in the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, which exercises the Ukrainian Parliament's control over the observance of human rights and freedoms in Ukraine. What role does your office play in the Ukrainian government's focus on the children forcibly deported by Russia, and how has this evolved during the full-scale invasion?
Thanks for your question. We started work with this topic with deported and forcibly displaced children 2 years ago, when Ukraine didn't know the full information about where they moving the children, Russia Federation, how they deported them or forcibly displaced them or separate them with their parents who are lived, unfortunately, in occupied territory right now. And we started work with this topic, and right now, after 2 years, we know a lot of information about our children. We try to coordinate the verification of information with our government, with the international organization like Humanitarian Laboratory of Yale. We work with a lot of stakeholders inside the country with NGO, and our main deal is the first idea. The first is graze all the information about the children which were deported, forcibly displaced, or who stay in occupied territories. The second is verify this information, because it's one of the main important. And the third, create a document, because you know that Russia told that if these children do not have their parents or relatives who can be official representative of their children, they wouldn't return these children to Ukraine. And that's why our office starting to work with this topic and coordinate this process. We have a lot of information, and right now our ombudsman communicate with Qatar, like with a country mediator who communicate with Russia our list of the children which we want to return, because we have a lot of children, but unfortunately Russia do not want to return them to Ukrainian side, and it's not so easy process, and unfortunately we couldn't control. For example, if we're sharing to them information, it doesn't mean that tomorrow they will come back to us and return to us these children which we're sharing them information about them. But still we are continue to do our work as good as we can, but unfortunately we return just 1,247 children. We have a list with tens of thousands of children. We know that 700,000 of children stay in Russia side, as Russia told in their official report. And we know that more than 1.5 million Ukrainian children stay, unfortunately, in occupied territory. And we do not know what's happening with them. Do they have any access to humanitarian medicine, education, and so far and so on. We continue to do our work with grazing the information, returning the children, and monitoring the situation in occupied territory, and try to change something. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that information and for reminding us also about the other children impacted by Russia's war. Now, Mikola, I'd like to turn to you. As Director of Advocacy for Razom for Ukraine, you've worked together with US and Ukrainian partners to raise awareness of the issue of Russia's abduction of Ukrainian children. What messaging have you found to be the most effective in reaching Americans? And are there key demographic groups that you look at to best direct communications around this topic's importance?
Thank you, Shelby. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to work with at the Atlantic Council to put this event together. And I wanted to also give a special thank you to Senators Grassley and Klobuchar for their opening remarks. I think that I'll start with your last question, Shelby. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for it because every demographic cares about this. We have not found a significant kind of like spread between people who are going to be invested in this issue and those who aren't. We have polling is pretty consistent in showing that like this is a topic that Americans care about. I can actually pull up the numbers here. So we did some polling in 2023, and then we did polling again this past February, so 2 years later. And both times we found that 71% of Americans polled found they believed that the arguments about the kidnapping of children by Russia were persuasive to get them to support additional aid to Ukraine. 46% of people, so of that 71, 47% in 2023 found it very persuasive, and only 46 found it persuasive in February of this year. So it only went down by 1 point on the very persuasive side. So what we see is that the American people are very consistent in seeing this as an engaging and persuasive argument. I think that one of the reasons why it's so effective and why we emphasize it so much is that it puts a stick in the wheels of people who are arguing that Putin is invading Ukraine and behaving the way that he is on the international stage for some larger geopolitical purpose. That his only goal is to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, and if that goal is satisfied, then Putin will, take the win and go back to the Kremlin and go back to ruling his own country. And when we tell people just how many kids Russia has kidnapped, and they realize the scale of this problem, it gets them thinking like, wait a minute, maybe it's about something more than NATO. Why, if he was trying to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, would he take 20,000 or 200,000 Ukrainian kids? There's something else going on here. And that, I think, is an incredibly important thing for us to be doing right now, is to helping people understand that Putin's goals are not geopolitical. He sees this war against Ukraine as a war of imperial conquest, trying to reestablish the Russian Empire, destroy Ukrainian identity. And you don't kidnap 20,000 kids if your only goal is to stop Ukraine from joining a defensive military alliance.
Well said. Thank you. Now, Nathaniel, please tell us about your work at Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab. How did your team work to track Ukrainian children forcibly deported by Russia and gather evidence on other Russian war crimes? And as mentioned by the senators, your work has also been in the news quite a bit lately. How does your work connect to administration funding and decisions, and what's the status of the project and its data?
Well, it's great to be here today. This is my first time talking publicly other than on Radio Free Europe since the hullabaloo about our funding and our data broke out a few weeks ago. And hullabaloo, that's a technical term. So our work at the Humanitarian Research Lab at the Yale School of Public Health on children in Ukraine began in 2022 when we began to realize that there was a systematic network being run by the Russian Federation to deport children from Ukraine from multiple regions, but particularly Donetsk, Luhansk, and then the temporarily occupied territories of Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and Kherson. And how we did that work really came down to selfies. The Russian officials, often on the mayoral level, who were taking the kids through what was like a sister cities program to the re-education camps, were taking pictures with the kids. And that began to give us latitude and longitude of where to point satellites to begin to see the network of re-education camps, which in many cases were on the footprints of the camps that Stalin used for the Pioneer Camp program going back to the 1950s. And so once we started to realize that this network stretched over 3,500 miles from the Black Sea to the Pacific, we began to realize that there was a lot more going on. And as we went forward in our investigation, we did a report on Belarus and its role. But then by December of last year, we were able to show that there were 3 interconnected databases that Russia was using to basically, like Amazon or eBay for orphans, to basically forcibly adopt and foster these children, naturalizing them as Russian citizens. And they were doing it by hiding them as if they were Russians in plain sight. And so for several months, we were basically trying to access safely the data inside these 3 databases. And in so doing, we were able to forensically figure out Putin and the Kremlin's specific role in the adoption program. As it relates to our funding right now, we have 6 more weeks left to finish transferring the data to Ukraine, all of it. And it's not just children's data. I think that gets lost in the coverage. It includes data about power generation attacks, multiple types of alleged war crimes by Russia, attacks on hospitals, et cetera, and torture and detention facilities that involve adults. But we have about 6 weeks to finish moving that to Ukraine and to our European partners. After that, we don't know what's going to happen. At this point, we run out of money again. And the team that's been working on this for almost 3 years will be terminated unless there's new funding. There's no intent from the administration to continue the program beyond the 6 weeks. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I only know one thing. We are entirely committed right now to what's a search and rescue mission. So we're assisting our Ukrainian partners, including Save Ukraine and Irina, who's on the call. We are going to continue to move as much information as we can move to help locate the exact locations of the kids until we go out of business.
Thank you for the work of you and your team. It's been tremendously important, and we appreciate you joining the Atlantic Council and Razom to talk about it. And Irina, I'm glad that you're working with them as well. Now, Christina, turning to you. On March 23rd, U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said that Ukraine-Russia prisoner exchanges and returning Ukrainian children illegally abducted by Russia were being looked at by the Trump team as possible confidence-building measures for negotiations towards a ceasefire. Is this a positive sign for U.S. government appetite to push on this issue? And what additional measures could the U.S. take to pressure Russia to facilitate the return of these children?
I do absolutely agree that it is Moscow that needs to build confidence, that it is Moscow that is the aggressor here, that it is Moscow that waged an unprovoked full-scale invasion of a sovereign country and that has been ravaging Ukraine's children as well as its broader civilian population through kidnapping, but not just through kidnapping. And so I think that we need to, as a U.S. posture, speak the truth very plainly. I think that it's unrealistic to say that we could solve a problem if we don't talk about it in candid terms. And so I do welcome that kind of coming from the administration, and I think we could use more of it. I think that we could also say, how much evidence do we have that Moscow is undermining confidence? We haven't seen them back off of civilian targeting. We haven't seen them engage the fact that they have 1.5 million Ukrainian children under their occupation. Those children are also at risk for the type of search and rescue efforts that were just discussed. And we have a lot of evidence, particularly on the kidnapped children, that Russia has tried to hide them. We've talked about this, changing names, changing birth dates, having a wide variety of bureaucratic hurdles to the rescue of individual children. So as the US, we need to say that it is not the grieving parents, the grieving grandparents, or the grieving guardians that have had these children ripped from their arms and from their lives, but it is Moscow. As we see Moscow continue to both hold these children, to cooperate with US authorities in publicly verifying the identities of children, and as we also see Moscow continue to militarize these children, that raises a hard question. Is the Russian state ready to live next door to a safe and prosperous Ukraine, a country that never threatened them? Or will they continue trying to turn Ukraine's own children against them? As long as we don't have confidence that Russia is ready to return Ukraine's children and to live peacefully next door, I think it's time for the administration to speak these truths very plainly and to have consequences that go along with them, including sanctions and other forms of economic pressure.
Thank you very much, Christina. Irina, what impact has Russia's forced deportation of the Ukrainian children and crimes against other children had on Ukrainian society?
Of course, when we talk about deportation and forcibly displaced, we talk about more than 2 million children, as I told, because 1.5 million near in occupied territory, 700,000 were deported or forcibly displaced or stay in Russia system, as we know from the official report. And of course, they try to change their identities, they change their documents, they change their name, they try to push them and create some new generation which wouldn't be things that they're Ukrainian, you know, and for us, of course, it's a deeply humanitarian crisis. We try to change the situation, but as you know, that any international humanitarian organization do not have any access to occupied territory, and that's why we couldn't change this situation. Right now, we try to work with our international partners and talk about one of the main things. We need to create some green corridors and create like position when our civilian person with the children can come back to their motherland, can come back with the children. We really very appreciate this debates and negotiation about the list of the children which we can to return maybe when our international partner right now speak about this. Of course, we don't have a lot of information, but we know that for us, it's crucial for our country. And we just finger cross and think that we need to do more as we can, that it will be like done.
Thank you very much. Now, Mikola, over in the US, how do Americans react when they hear about Russia's war crimes in Ukraine, especially for the first time? And do they respond more strongly to information about what's happened with the forced deportation of Ukrainian children?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is one of those war crimes that has not been discussed very widely, which is, I think, very surprising to me. A lot of people are shocked when they first hear of this and they ask us, why didn't I hear of this earlier? And so I think all of us here on this call and all of the viewers that are watching this, I think that we have a responsibility together to do two things. One is to engage with as many people as we can to spread the word about this horrific act that Russia is perpetrating against. It's not just against Ukraine, it's against humanity. We have to engage with people who disagree with us, people on other sides of this issue and other issues, whether it's on social media, respectfully, of course, or in person. We can't just be talking to people who agree with us and people who agree that Russia's committing genocide against Ukraine. We have to be talking to those who disagree and who maybe are vulnerable to Russian propaganda arguments that these kids are being rescued or evacuated from dangerous places. And we have to be ready to counter those arguments. The second responsibility that all of us have is to engage with our elected officials. You know, we can't just be listening to new facts and disturbing stories about what Russia is doing to Ukrainian children and then say like, wow, that is bad. We have to act. We have to do something with that information. And, you know, members of Congress are always asking us for more constituent phone calls. So, you know, if you live in the United States, which I'm assuming is the vast majority of the viewers here today, please make sure to call your members of Congress. Tell them about this issue. Tell them that it matters to you, and make sure that they know that the American people are following this very closely.
And if people are looking for guidance on how to reach out to their members, do you have any suggestions?
Yes, they can go to releasethekids.com. This is a website that we launched. You can go to this website and it'll tell you exactly how to contact your member of Congress. It's actually even easier than that. You can just put in your zip code, and it'll automatically identify who is your member of Congress and suggest a pre-written note that you can automatically send them through that website.
Great, thank you. So speaking of engagement, we've already heard from Senators Grassley and Klobuchar, but I'd like to note that they led a bipartisan letter in March urging the U.S. State Department to clarify the future of the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab and the data already collected on abducted Ukrainian children. So Nathaniel, do you still see bipartisan support for this issue? And what does the temporary reversal of funding, you mentioned for 6 weeks, suggest to you about any movement from the State Department and the administration on possibly reinstating the lab's work permanently?
I'll take the last part first. I don't think the administration is going to reinstate the lab permanently. And I think that the administration realized that they had both a political issue and an optical issue, and they responded to ensure we could complete the scheduled transfer to Ukraine and our European partners. I'm glad they did that, but that's the minimum. There has been no appetite expressed in any specific way to get us back on tracking. So people need to understand right now we are not tracking the kids through U.S. government support. All of that we're doing independently with basically, 2 nickels, a can of Coke, and a Snickers bar. We have no resources left for tracking, so that's unfunded. We're just doing that technically on a volunteer basis right now. And so what the U.S. government is funding is moving the 3 years of conflict observatory work, which included Yale, but also multiple other partners, as planned to European partners, particularly Ukraine. So right now, the U.S. is not supporting tracking the children. Nobody is. Right now, that work is not funded as it relates to Yale's part of it. But it's important to understand that we're just one element in really an ecosystem of multiple groups that play multiple roles in what's a hostage situation. Let's call it what it is. So, and I want to hit something really important here, and then answer your question about the political situation. People need to understand legally what Russia was required to do in this situation. What they were required to do underneath the Geneva Conventions, given the special protected status children have under the law of armed conflict, is 4 things. They were supposed to register the kids with the Red Cross. They were supposed to allow them to call home immediately. They were supposed to move them to a third-party country, especially in cases of exempted emergency medical or combat evacuation, which is allowed in certain cases, but for a matter of days or weeks. It's been 3 years, okay? And so they're supposed to move them to a third-party location. The 4th thing is they were supposed to allow the UN and the Red Cross to access them. We're at this gets to the political point. We're at a perilous moment, not just about kids in Ukraine, but about the future of all children in the wars of tomorrow. If we get into a situation where we trade the United States, Ukraine, Russia gets into a negotiation where these kids are traded like hostages rather than just simply returned, which is the requirement of the law, then we have fundamentally destroyed the Geneva Conventions in perpetuity. Because that means that children no longer have special protected status. They can be treated like POWs or spies. If we do that, so that's what the so what is here. So everyone understands it. If that deal goes down, where kids are traded as if they were minerals or land, then it means kids in all wars of the future no longer have special protected status, and that the United States created a negotiation in which that happened. I don't think there's a Republican, a Democrat, a libertarian, a Green Party member who thinks that's a good idea, that we reward kidnapping. So I think the political reality is going to continue to reflect that.
Nathaniel, I am glad you are speaking publicly because I think that is very well put. Thank you for that. Irina, how do you see the future of your work in Ukraine and partnership with the West? Has the shift in the US administration policy had an impact on your work? And have you seen levels of support from Ukraine's European partners in holding Russia accountable increase since January in the US?
As we understand, the work with the deported and forcibly displaced children is a complex and prolonged process. But despite all obstacles, Ukraine remains steadfast in its committed to bring back every child and ensuring they have the necessary condition for recovery and reintegration at home. The recent suspension of the US program tracking deported Ukrainian children to Russia could have serious negative consequences, particularly by weakening international pressure on Russia and reduction the effectiveness of efforts to locate and return these children. At every international meeting and during visits of our foreign partners, the Ombudsman of Ukraine always ask to continue support of Ukraine for Ukraine and programs aimed at identified and repatriation deported children. As you know, right now with the return, and we have just one country mediator, it's Qatar, and it's not enough. We need more country mediator. We need more partners who will support us with a sync program and try to find more information about our children. Of course, we need to continue work with Nathaniel and his team because the information are crucial for our office and our country. And of course, it's about reintegration program. We work with countries who joined to the International Coalition for the Returning of Ukrainian Children from Deportation, and they supported us with reintegration program. For us, it's just important. This program is important too as like a searching program. And we continue work with everyone and ask the country supported all of this topic as I told about, because it's a system and we couldn't work just with a searching or just with reintegration. We need to have some support from our partners, everyone topic separate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that information. I know you have to leave as well, so thank you so much for joining for this conversation and for all the critical work you do.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. All right, Christina. In 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for the war crime of unlawful deportation of children and transfer of population from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. Has there been any concrete evidence that this helped return deported Ukrainian children? And do you expect that this designation could help for future cases and investigations beyond the context of Ukraine's forcibly deported children?
Yes, the short answer is yes, and here's how. So when you are dealing with a network of perpetrators, we can start at the top, like with Putin. Putin is the head of a kleptocratic nation. Many people believe that he is one of the people in the world through illicit gain. He is the undisputed leader of Russia. He has unlimited power. So he is not, I would say, necessarily waging this war or kidnapping these children due to a desire for more money or for power. He is doing it for identity to be the sort of undisputed imperial leader, as we've been talking about. And so what the ICC warrant does is it undermines that propaganda narrative that he tries to create for his own people and for the world. So the ICC warrant restricts his travel. It is hard to make these specious claims that he is a world leader or that he deserves to be a world leader when he is restricted from travel, and when he is also, every time he is restricted from travel, the world is reminded because he is a child predator on an industrialized scale. Now, I also want to pick up with a point about this being a hostage situation. I also think that this is not talked about enough. There are multiple ways that we can negotiate, and how you negotiate a business deal or a real estate deal is very, very different. My background is in atrocity prevention and civilian protection, and we go after trying to get 100% of the people returned home. None of us would ever be satisfied to only go in for 50% and only get 50% of the people back. And so I think that it is very important for the administration to reckon with what they're dealing with here, that we need to have a similar mindset of hostage rescue, and that doing that will be upholding these things that are in place that limit the perpetrators in chief, like Putin. This is a brief comment, but I also think we need to talk much more about the radicalization has happened within Russian society due to the number of Russian citizens that participate in this. This is the largest scale kidnapping operation that we've seen since Nazi Germany. And we do know that Nazi Germany had a process where people had to come to terms with that. And so I think that we as the US are wise to support efforts to acknowledge the truth of what's going on, to rescue Ukraine's children, and to talk about the de-radicalization that needs to happen for everyone from Putin on down the line, to hold them accountable and to say that there are real consequences to this type of radical behavior against children.
Thank you, Christina. And I see we have some interesting questions coming in from our audience. If anyone else wants to submit some, you can go to askac.org. Now, Mikola, going back to US politics. So in your experience, has the new administration taken a different approach to Russian war crimes than the Biden administration? How so, and how may this have impacted your messaging approaches? You're muted.
There we go. I think it's pretty clear that the approach is different. Generally, with respect to foreign policy, of course, with respect to Russia and Ukraine, and certainly with respect to Russia's war crimes against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And you know, the tragedy of what's going on with the humanitarian research lab at Yale, I think, is a really good example of that. And it's good that funding has been reinstated for 6 weeks, but my God, this is an important program that needs to be supported permanently and needs to be expanded. And of course, the United States needs to be involved in this kind of work and supporting this kind of work. And it's shocking to me that anybody could try to make the argument that it's not the place of the United States to be involved in this, to be trying to help find these kids and help Ukraine to bring them back. I think that what Dr. Hook was saying about the radicalization of Russian society is something that really should be underscored. Often when we're having these conversations about what Russia's doing to Ukraine, we use Vladimir Putin as a shorthand for the perpetrator. And we just say, you know, Putin invaded Ukraine, and then we say, you know, so this is how Zelensky is responding. Putin has not personally invaded Ukraine. He did not pick up a gun and run towards the border while firing his weapon. Putin has not personally kidnapped any Ukrainian children, as far as I know. The bombs that are dropped in maternity wards in Ukraine are dropped by Russian soldiers, and the orders are passed down and they are obeyed. So there is something terribly wrong with Russian society right now, both in terms of their participation in this massive kidnapping program, as Dr. Hook mentioned, but also in their acceptance. It's more than acceptance. It's like active participation in crimes against humanity targeted at the Ukrainian people. And I think that that's a missing part of the policy conversation here in Washington. We are treating this, Washington is kind of accepting the framing of this as a business deal. You know, Ukraine and Russia will come to the table, the United States will mediate, everybody's going to have to give a little bit. But I'm sorry, like, what fraction of the kids should Ukraine get back? 50%, and Russia gets to keep half? Like, that's an abominable thing to even suggest. And yet we're approaching the whole narrative around generating peace between Russia and Ukraine as if, you know, Russia and Ukraine are two equal parties, equally at fault. They got up one day and decided that they're going to fight each other like siblings. Russia and Ukraine are not siblings. Russia wants to destroy Ukraine and wipe it off of the face of the earth. And the kidnapping of children is just yet another piece of evidence that Russia has a genocidal goal, and that negotiating with a genocidal maniac, it's going to be tough, and it's going to be very tough, and it's not going to succeed. We have to find a better approach, and that approach is strength. We have to be strong. We have to have more economic pressure. We have to have more military support for Ukraine. That's the only way that we're going to get Russia to back off.
Thank you. And Christina, that I just want to give you a chance to respond if there's anything you want to add on the comments on both Russian society and that the calls that this is genocide.
So I fully agree. And, I say that as both a genocide scholar and a person who has specialized in trying to stop genocides as they're unfolding. We know, including as the US government, we know that we're not often able to change the minds and the motives of people who are in that hardened an ideology. And so what we try to do is we degrade their means. So we degrade their opportunities for kidnapping Ukrainian children. And part of that will also be the sanctions that the US has. So sanctions, again, are not tied to the presence of warfare. They are tied to the fact that this is an invasion in violation of the UN Charter. And so I think it is perfectly reasonable for US negotiators to say an invasion includes this massive kidnapping of the population you invaded. And so to keep those in place, not just as a kind of incentive to have Russia release those children, but also we need to remember that every time we relax sanctions or we do other activities that prop up the Russian economy, that will go back into Russia's atrocity machine, which includes this industrialized kidnapping of children. It includes the missiles that target Ukrainian civilians every day. And so on the one hand, we can't be trying to stop Russia doing that, and then also giving these financial incentives that allow that to happen in the first place. So we need to recognize in a very clinical way, I would say, that Russia is committing genocide. It does have an intent to destroy the Ukrainian national group in part, including through kidnapping its children, which is very clear in the Genocide Convention. And we need to target that so that we can have this secure and lasting peace for Ukraine, for Europe, and for a Russia of the future.
Thank you very much. Nathaniel, you touched on this earlier, but I just want to get an answer and make it clear. So you said the Humanitarian Research Lab tracked additional Russian war crimes and documented evidence for future efforts to hold Russian authorities accountable. So this included sharing evidence with European authorities and the International Criminal Court. Is that correct? And how much of this evidence has been shared? What has come out of it on the US and European side? And how much of the remaining evidence remains in jeopardy?
We transferred twice to the International Criminal Court on both children and other issues, including power generation, before a total of 6 indictments. So 2 on the kids issue and 4 on power generation. We also provided the Ukrainians, and we said this publicly in the report we released in December, the names of the 314 children that we were able to identify and develop dossiers on. One thing about the 314 children that I think people need to understand is 50% of those kids, so half of that group we identified, which we think is a small number of those in the adoption and fostering program, they're all brothers and sisters. And I think for me, that's one of the most horrifying things. They stole sibling groups. And so I think people need to understand that the data we have is about there are 4 groups of kids, and this is often lost. We're tracking 4 different groups. 1, those that were taken to the re-education camps, which make up the majority. Right now we've identified 6,000 in the camps as of 2023. We're tracking closer to 35,000 that we're trying to confirm now. Then there's those that are institution kids that make up, we think, the majority of those in adoption and fostering. So in the formal coercive adoption and fostering plan that uses the database. The two other kids that we have data on, kids groups, are the battlefield kids, which we know the least about, which were primarily in Mariupol and in Donetsk and Severodonetsk, taken off the battlefield by Russian combat forces during fighting. Then the fourth were those in the filtration camps, which were basically concentration camps, detention camps to filter out to separate pro-Russian from perceived anti-Russian civilians after the fall of Mariupol. And those kids were separated directly from their parents in the camps. Okay. So we're tracking these four different groups, and they each get tracked differently through different combinations of data. And that data has different purposes, both within accountability operations and what we'll say SAR is the search and rescue and return. Okay. So our focus now in terms of what we're doing independent of this data preservation phase that we're completing in the 6 weeks with the no money we have left is what we're doing is entirely focused on search and rescue now. And so we moved away from the accountability focus, which means we're collecting different data now for different purposes to try to move super fast on triaging when and where and how many the kids are in specific locations. And the thing about that, Dr. Hook mentioned this, and I want to underscore it. We're playing whack-a-mole, okay? The Russians are hiding these kids in a shell game and moving it around. So if anyone is defending these guys on what they're doing, you have to understand they took them, they hid them, and they're doing things to conceal them well beyond hiding their names. Okay. They're trying to prevent the international community from understanding under what red solo cup they're hiding the ping pong ball. And in this case, the ping pong ball is a child. And so if anyone's thinking that's cool, well, that dog don't hunt. And so so the critical thing now is right now the international community is not actively funding the effort to find which solo cup hides which ping pong balls. Right now, that's an unfunded mission. Over.
Thank you very much. We are going to now do a rapid round of audience Q&A. So I will pitch you some questions and ask you to answer in brief. Christina, this is a question from Dr. Jackie Nenchin. Is there anything that we in the U.S. education sector can do to support efforts to help the children?
I really appreciate that question. Thank you. And I think that what it has always come down to for me is that this is such a clear case of the truth being on our side. This is the most documented war in history that thanks to the work of experts, including on this call and other teams, we have a lot of documentation. And so what I have found is even speaking, whether it is students or professionals, I get asked this question over and over and over again, what can we do to help? And so then I refer to them to our good colleagues at Razom. I talk with them about calling our political representation across the partisan spectrum. And then I also say that it is very, very important that perpetrators want people to feel powerless. That we know that they want those Ukrainian children to feel powerless. That's why they abuse them and mistreat them and try to take their identity from them. But they also want us to feel powerless. They want us to say that this issue is so big that we might as well just look away. But by the sort of daily activity, just sort of folding a simple social media post or call to your representative or a small donation to a trusted organization, there are a variety of ways that you can essentially throw pebbles out into the world, and you never know which pebble is going to start an avalanche. So thank you for that question. I think just as much as we can, just bringing the truth to our fellow citizens in the United States and around the world and asking our leaders to be accountable to that truth.
Thank you. Nathaniel, we've got a question from David Young. He says, in light of the funding issues, are there ways that ordinary Americans can help by conducting OSINT to help track evidence of kidnapped children or other war crimes? For example, Bellingcat style investigations.
Please don't do it. For the love of God, don't do it. And I'll tell you, I get this all the time. Don't do it. There are three reasons why. One, you have to be protected in terms of being able to cover your tracks on accessing this data. The Russians are watching, and you go in, you touch this stuff in large scale, they're going to pull it down and it's going to disappear. You're going to endanger the chain of custody. Second thing is you have to have ethical standards for handling this data to protect the identities of the kids. And we've seen over and over again, including journalists such as the New York Times, they put out the faces. And no, do not do that. Okay. Because then you're telling Russia which ones we don't know about, right? By telling them which ones you do. And so that endangers the kids because often those who are doing the OSINT put out the raw to show how fancy they are on being able to find the kids on Twitter, and they end up blowing the transmission in terms of being able to track them. Happens all the time and puts them at risk. The third thing is technical standards for chain of custody. So this stuff is admissible in court. Okay. Not everyone gets to go John McClane on the 32nd floor of Nakatomi Plaza on data that when you touch it can cause kids to disappear permanently. I would love everyone to do an all play on this. But this is not like going and helping rake your neighbor's lawn. This is a very tactically complex process of being able to ensure you don't make these kids at further risk by how you approach the data about them, because Russia's running counterintelligence in terms of what we know and what we don't know, and how we access information and how we don't. And a lot of what we're using, and you can see this from our reports, is geospatial data. Okay. And so that geospatial data is not something that the average researcher has access to be able to do that at scale. And so you're not going to have all the pieces, and you could put the kids at further risk.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Another question for you from Elena. She says, Nathaniel, thank you for your incredible work. How can we donate to the Humanitarian Research Center's work?
You can donate through the Yale School of Public Health. Go to the donation page off of the website, and then when it says other, put in what you want to donate to, put in HRL / Ukraine kids. And I want to say that there's a lot of organizations that need help right now. The bottom is dropped out of everything. So if you don't donate to us, donate to Razom, donate to the Ukrainian folks, Bring Back Kids UA. They're give somewhere. If it's not Yale, that's cool. But just support the efforts, because everyone in this constellation of orgs need your help right now. So there's no wrong answer. Over.
Thank you so much. This has been a very grim but also inspiring conversation to hear so much care, empathy, and some passion behind this. And again, thank you to the senators for their work, leadership, and messages. Thank you to our partner, Razom, for this event. And thank you to our panelists. And thank you to our audience. We have a lot of great questions I couldn't get to. It's good to know that people care so much about this. So keep an eye out on Razom and for everyone involved. And join us again for future conversations. Thank you.